So I'm here with Morgan Reed, who is the priest in charge and church planter for the Franconia Springfield Mission. And Morgan, you have been doing a great job gathering this group and forming this new community. Church planting is difficult under any circumstances, but you've been doing it during a pandemic. So tell us what that's been like. How has it been for you to gather this new community of faith when you can't even see each other face to face?
Yeah, thank you. Challenging is the right word. Planting is nebulous, because the church goes through different growth stages, and you're really learning. Like, we have our first child, we have a 7-month-old, and thinking about when he came home from the hospital and he was a week old, we thought, where's the instruction manual for this child? What does it mean when he cries? And what does it mean to be good parents at each stage? And it seemed like week after week was a different developmental stage. And church planting feels like that anyways, where the church in its infancy just feels so nebulous, and you feel like there's no instruction manual for how to do this. And it really, each child is different in the way that they need to be approached and the way that they need to be shepherded. And so that was true anyways, and then throw in the complicated nature of the pandemic. Our first meeting that we were ever going to have just to explain the vision for this new church was at the end of March. And so at the beginning of March, everything looked fine. We were planning on telling people what we were going to do. And then the pandemic started to set in. And then this question was, can we meet in groups that are larger than a certain number? And we thought, no problem. We don't have a large group yet. And then it became a shelter in place or stay-at-home orders in the state of Virginia. And so instead of doing what I love to do, which is hospitality-driven kind of community building, what we had to do is take in-person and then move the whole vision meeting to a Zoom call. And that was really hard. On the one hand, what it did is it allowed some of our supporters to participate who live in other parts of the country and even as far off as Oxford, England. And so some of the people got to be on that initial call who aren't part of the launch team, but who are supporters and have been praying for this work. And so that was neat. But we missed out on the opportunity to have people in the same room, have side conversations, and that really changed the trajectory for how we were going to do things. We were going to do a lot more in person, and then we had to figure out, how do we build this community virtually? And our vision has been to become a common people in common prayer for uncommon transformation. So the first response was, how do we get people praying? And because we were using Zoom, we started by doing Compline on Wednesday nights. And we started gathering people for virtual Compline over Zoom. And then the next thing we did is I thought, if I'm already doing morning prayer, why not just do that at my dining room table and include others in that prayer time? And so we started live streaming morning prayer through Facebook Live every morning, Monday through Saturday. Saturdays we would do family morning prayer out of the Book of Common Prayer. But the point at that juncture was, how do we get people using the Book of Common Prayer, discipling their households and themselves where they're at, because they can't go out and be with one another, which is not how I like to operate. I'm an extrovert, and it was really hard. It felt like a time of exile, and other people are in that boat too. So the point was, how do we get people to see one another and pray together? And that was our initial stage.
Yeah. So as you were dealing with those questions, you were thinking about the difference in the dynamic of being in person with people as opposed to being virtual. Could you talk about the difference between those two, and how does that impact becoming a new community and people really getting to know each other?
It's really hard for them to engage one-on-one, face-to-face with a live stream. So that was one opportunity for us to think, how do we allow a low bar of entry for people to enter into what we're doing, where they don't have to sign up for anything, they can just click a link and join. And so it left a room for anonymity for people who wanted to just test the waters, taste and see. Zoom, on the other hand, is a bit more of a commitment. We created RSVPs through secure forms, so people have to RSVPs for Zoom calls, and by RSVPing for a Zoom call, that's one more level of commitment than just clicking on something. But because there is that one more level of commitment, there's a little bit more trust with the people in that chat room, in the Zoom call. So one of the things that we did is one Saturday per month, we started doing a series on where Jesus talks about what it means to be his disciples. And we turned that into a small group opportunity where we all came into the small group. I told them what was happening in the next few weeks and months, and then we would break out into small groups using Zoom breakout rooms. And that helped because you can break that down to about 3 or 4 screens. And then you can have those side conversations in a way that you can't on a larger Zoom call, which often feels like a webinar. And so those were 2 avenues for doing the virtual that were helpful. Now, the state of Virginia did eventually loosen some of those restrictions, and they said you can have up to 25 people gather. And then if you're talking outside, the number was way higher. So I decided, let's just start holding once a month outdoor events. And one of my goals for this summer, for June, July, August, was not just to pray together, but if we're going to become this common people, we need to have people meet one another. So my goal for this summer was to have every person in the church plant meet every other person in the church plant. Because up to this point, just like a Zoom call where everyone's watching one screen, it felt like I was the relational hub in the wheel. And I was connected to this person, I was connected to this person, but none of them were connected to one another. They were all connected through me, and I wanted to break that up. So the summer became, how do we get people drawn into relationship? So we created monthly events where we prayed together for family prayer, and then we had either lawn games or we went on a walk together, things where people could be outside, be socially distant, and to have an opportunity to have those side conversations that are really necessary to get to know one another.
It sounds to me like you have made the best use of technology and that you've probably been forced to do some things that you may not have done otherwise. And you have this real nice mix of things that are virtual and things that are in person. And I wonder, when you think about things that you have had to do or had to learn how to do because of this, are there things that you think were actually better for having to deal with this pandemic?
Yeah, so one of the challenges in Northern Virginia is distance and travel, and the difficulty for a lot of households with having young children.
Yeah.
So how do you get people to a small group every week if you have an infant or a toddler at home? You can't get both parents, and rarely can you get one parent to drive 20 minutes to a small group.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've started doing are these formation groups, where it's it's the beginning of our catechesis as we think about forming disciples. And we're studying 1 Peter right now. And then later on, we'll be going into more Anglican-specific topics to help people grow in this tradition. And one of the things that we realized is that not everyone has the same level of comfort with going to somebody's house. Right. So we are committing to in-person going to meet outdoors. People are bringing their own food. They'll be in someone's backyard for the discussion. But then also what we've done is we've opened a Zoom call. So at 7:30, everyone's going to show up. We're going to eat together. But then at 8 o'clock, a Zoom call opens up so that the discussion that happens in person is also happening on a Zoom call. So people who, if distance is a hindrance to being able to come, if they're not comfortable being with other people in person, or if they're just new and it feels really scary committing to coming to somebody's house that you've never met before, which is real, then now there's this option for them to log on to a Zoom call and to be able to participate with this group so that eventually they'll know the people, life will open up eventually, and the pandemic will subside eventually as well, and they will be able to have those in-person relationships that are so key. So we don't look at it as an end to itself, but those virtual expressions allow for the fostering of in-person relationships that are so necessary.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're lowering the bar in a sense and making it easier for people to get connected up front. And then as they get more comfortable, then they can enter into it in a more, say, a more personal way. So in terms of methodology, were there things that you had to change and those changes were surprising to you in some way?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we wanted to do was hold off doing Sunday worship as a launch team until next year, once we had a chance to have several months of people meeting in my house weekly for eating together and worshiping together. But because of the pandemic and the fluctuating restrictions, we felt the best thing to do at this point, as people were getting to know one another, is start to worship as a launch team outside. And rather than do weekly worship, which is a lot of just human hours and labor, and on my end, preaching a sermon every week, we decided to do once a month Eucharists outside. And so what we did is, I spent time getting everything that we needed to have an altar that was very tabernacle-y so that we could set it up and take it down and my car could function as the sacristy. And so my CRV is like this traveling sacristy once a month. And we set it up. We've decided to use Lake Akatink. They have a large covered shelter. And we set it up there. And one of the things that was beautiful when we worshiped together, the inside of the roof looked like a church. And so you felt like you were worshiping the Lord at the top of this hill overlooking the city, even though it overlooks a lake. But it's like this little city on the top of a hill. It was really beautiful. That's where people are on Sunday morning. We saw so many people running and biking and walking, and we were next to the public bathroom, so people had to stop and see what we were doing, whether they liked it or not. So some people awkwardly covered their eyes and just beelined it for the restroom, but we had a couple people who parked their bikes by a tree, and they just stood and watched from the beginning of the service all the way through the homily. And I just thought, this is where people are on a Sunday morning. What a blessing that because of the pandemic, the church is having to be where the people are doing what the church does, and becoming the church.
That really is a blessing. And when you think about it, that's what we need to be doing anyway. But in some ways, we have to get out of the patterns that we're in order to do that. So that's been a real blessing to you to do that. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.